The rain came down like it had a grudge against the city, and Adaeze stood in the middle of it, barefoot, blood on her sleeve, a child pressed so tightly to her chest that he had stopped crying and started shaking instead. She wasn't running toward anything. She was running away from everything. Behind her, 3 blocks back, a black car had flipped onto its side, and a man was screaming her name into the smoke. She didn't look back. Looking back had gotten people killed before. She had exactly one plan left, and it was insane. Walk into the one part of the city no sane person walked into on purpose, and pray that the man she hadn't seen in 5 years still remembered what her voice sounded like when she said please. If you're watching this from your car, your bed, or your break room right now, comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe before this story takes a turn you won't see coming, because it will. Trust me, it will. The intersection of Munhwa and 5th was where Kang Tae-min's convoy always slowed down, because it was where, 6 years ago, someone had tried to put a bullet in his father's skull and missed by 4 inches. Tae-min kept the habit out of respect, not fear. Fear wasn't a language he spoke anymore. Grief was. Rage was, but not fear. So when his driver hit the brakes hard enough to throw him against the seatbelt, Tae-min's first instinct wasn't alarm. It was irritation, sharp and immediate, the kind that made grown men in his organization go quiet. Then he saw her through the windshield, through the rain smearing the glass into something like a memory, and the irritation died in his throat. A woman, a child, standing in the middle of the road like the city itself had spat them out. He knew that walk before he knew that face. Adaeze always walked like she was daring the world to try something. "Don't move the car," he said, though no one had asked him anything. He got out into the rain without an umbrella, without his coat, without a single one of the 4 bodyguards who lived to die for him managing to catch up before he crossed the road. Up close, she looked like a woman who had aged 5 years in 5 days. There was a gash above her eyebrow. Her lips were the pale color of someone who'd been cold for hours. And the child in her arms, maybe 4 years old, maybe 5, had Tae-min's own mother's eyes. He would know those eyes anywhere. He saw them every night in the mirror. Adaeze, her name came out of him like something breaking. "I need you to not ask me anything right now," she said, and her voice cracked on right. "And I need you to take him. Just take him. Please. Take him where? Away from me. That's the only part that matters." Behind them, headlights swung around the corner. 2 sets moving fast, moving wrong. Tae-min's hand went instinctively to his hip, to the weapon he hadn't drawn in 3 years, and in one motion he pulled Adaeze and the boy against the side of his own car, shielding both of them with his body the way he used to shield her from the rain outside her apartment. Back when rain was just weather and not a countdown. The headlights slowed, then turned off down a side street. A warning, not an attack. Someone letting them know they'd been seen. "Get in the car," Tae-min said, and this time it wasn't a request either of them was allowed to refuse. Inside, with the doors locked and the city blurring past the windows, the silence between them was louder than the rain had been. The boy had fallen asleep against Adaeze's shoulder, exhausted past fear, and Tae-min watched his small chest rise and fall like he was watching something he wasn't allowed to want. "Whose is he?" Tae-min finally asked, though some part of him, the part that had memorized every curve of this woman's face 5 years ago, already knew the shape of the answer and was terrified of it. Adaeze didn't answer right away. She looked out the window instead, at the neon smearing sideways in the rain, and when she finally spoke, her voice had gone somewhere far away. "Your father knew where I was for 5 years, Tae-min. He knew, and he let you believe I was dead. If this story is already sitting in your chest, drop a comment and let it out. Has a lie ever come from someone who was supposed to love you? Like this video if you're still here, because it's about to get worse before it gets better." Tae-min's grip on the door handle turned his knuckles white. His father had died 14 months ago. Heart, the doctor said, though nothing about the old man's heart had ever behaved the way a normal heart did. Tae-min had spent those 14 months rebuilding an empire out of the wreckage the old man left behind, burying rivals, burying grief, burying the woman he never stopped loving under a headstone in his memory that apparently had never needed to exist. He told me you drowned, Tae-min said. Han River, 11 months after you disappeared. I identified, his voice caught. I identified a body. You identified whoever he paid to make sure you'd stop looking. The car went quiet in a way that felt dangerous, like a held breath before a scream. Adaeze finally turned to face him, and in the dashboard light he could see just how much the last 5 years had carved into her. Not just tiredness, but vigilance, the permanent posture of someone who slept with one eye open. Your father found out I was pregnant 3 weeks before your engagement to Minji-oh was supposed to be announced. He came to my apartment. He told me that a woman like me, no name, no family with any weight in this city, would only ever be a liability standing next to the future head of the Kang line. He said if I disappeared quietly, the child would be safe. If I didn't, she swallowed. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Tae-min felt something in his chest cave inward, slow and total, like a building coming down floor by floor. The engagement to Minji was called off 8 days after you vanished. I told everyone it was my choice. It was never your choice. Nothing that man touched was ever anyone's choice but his. He looked at the sleeping boy again, and this time he let himself really look. The shape of the jaw, the stubborn set of the mouth even in sleep. Features that belonged unmistakably to the Kang bloodline, sitting quietly on the shoulder of a woman his father had erased from existence. What's his name? Tae-min asked, so quietly it barely survived the sound of the rain. Suho, she whispered. I named him after the word for guardian, because that's what I needed him to become someday. Someone who could protect himself, since I might not always be there too. Tae-min reached over, slow, like he was approaching something wild, and rested 2 fingers against the boy's small hand. Suho's fingers curled instinctively around his without waking. For a moment, one single fragile moment, none of the rest of it mattered. Not the empire, not the men who ran it, not the 5 stolen years. Just this, a father touching his son's hand for the first time. Then the radio on the driver's console crackled to life, and a voice, tight with urgency, cut the moment cleanly in half. Sir, we have a problem. Detective Han just called it in. They found Director Ryu's body an hour ago. And sir, he was holding a photograph of the woman. Adaeze went rigid beside him. Tae-min's stomach dropped through the floor of the car. Ryu was the man who identified the body 5 years ago, he said slowly, understanding arriving like ice water down his spine. He's the one who signed off on her death certificate. Someone's cleaning up, Adaeze said, and her voice had gone flat with a fear so old it had stopped sounding like fear at all. Someone found out I'm alive before you did, and they're erasing anyone who knows the truth. Who else knows? Adaeze's eyes filled, and for the first time since she'd stepped in front of his car, she looked less like a woman fighting and more like a woman who had simply run out of places to run. Your father didn't act alone, Tae-min, she said. Someone helped him hide me. Someone still inside your organization, and I don't know who. The car went silent except for the wipers, beating back and forth like a heartbeat that refused to slow down. And Tae-min understood, with total and sickening clarity, that the war he thought he'd already won had never actually ended. It had just been waiting for the rain and the woman standing in it, and the child who carried his family's blood and apparently his family's danger in equal measure. If you felt that shift in your chest just now, you're not alone. Like this video, and tell me in the comments if you saw that coming, because the story isn't done breaking your heart yet. They didn't go back to the estate. Tae-min knew better than that now. The estate had eyes that reported to people he could no longer trust, walls that had kept secrets from him for 5 years without his knowledge. Instead, the driver took them to a safe house in Itaewon that existed on no official ledger, a place even his own lieutenants didn't know about, because Tae-min had learned the hard way that the most dangerous enemies were rarely the ones outside your door. It was there, past midnight, with Suho finally asleep in the next room under a borrowed blanket, that Adaeze told him the rest of it, how she'd spent the first year in Busan under a stolen name, how she'd given birth alone in a rented room above a noodle shop, how she'd moved 4 more times over 5 years every time she felt eyes on her that lingered too long. How, 3 days ago, 2 men had found the apartment anyway, and how she'd gotten Suho out through a fire escape while the men searched the wrong room, and how she had nowhere left to go except toward the one danger that might impossibly also be the only safety left in the world. Adaeze's hands were wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Because 3 days ago, one of the men who broke into my apartment said something while he thought I couldn't hear him. He said, "The boy needs to disappear before the boss finds out he's alive." She looked up. "Tae-min, they didn't say before you found out. They said before the boss finds out. Present tense. Like there's someone else running this right now who already knows I'm alive. Someone who's been ahead of both of us the entire time." The realization landed on Tae-min like a physical blow, and every version of the last 5 years he had built for himself. His father's grief-fueled cruelty, a tragedy born of one desperate old man's control, collapsed and rebuilt itself into something far colder. This wasn't his father acting alone in a moment of panic 5 years ago. This was a plan, ongoing, maintained. Someone had kept Adaeze's survival a secret, not to protect the family, but to hold it in reserve. A card to be played the moment it became useful. "Someone's been protecting this secret for their own reasons," Tae-min said slowly. "Not to bury it, to use it against me." "Or to use him," Adaeze whispered, glancing toward the room where Suho slept, small and unaware that he had become the center of a war he hadn't even known existed. "An heir nobody else controls yet. A bloodline claim that could split your organization in half the moment it's revealed at the right time, to the right people." Tae-min stood so fast the chair scraped back against the floor, and for the first time that night, Adaeze saw something in his face she hadn't seen since the last night she'd seen him alive in her old life. Not the composed, careful mask of a man who ran an empire, but the raw, unguarded fury of a man who had just realized how thoroughly he'd been lied to by everyone who claimed to love him. "Then we find out who," he said, "tonight. This is the part where it gets dangerous for real. Subscribe now if you love stories where the twist changes everything you thought you understood, because in about 2 minutes, it's going to." The name came from the last place either of them expected, Suho. He woke crying near 2 in the morning, disoriented in an unfamiliar room, and when Adaeze rushed to comfort him, the boy, barely 5, barely able to explain what a nightmare even was, said something that made her blood run cold. "The scary auntie was in my dream again, the one who used to visit us in Busan. She always smiled, but her eyes didn't." Adaeze went white. "Suho, what auntie?" "The one who brought us rice cakes. She always asked if I remembered my daddy's name." Tae-min, standing in the doorway, felt the floor tilt beneath him. Only 3 people in his adult life had ever called him by his childhood nickname instead of his title. His mother, dead 11 years. His father, dead 14 months. And his father's most trusted lieutenant, the woman who had run his family's finances since before Tae-min was born, the woman who had sat across from him at every board meeting for the past year, offering condolences with a straight face. Director Yoon. "She's been visiting them," Tae-min said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "For years. Under my roof, in my organization, at my own table. She's known this entire time, and she let me grieve a dead woman while she checked in on my living son like a family friend." "Why would she keep him alive instead of just eliminating the threat?" Adaeze asked, though her voice already carried the horrible shape of the answer. "Because a dead child is worthless to her," Tae-min said. "A living heir she controls, a secret she can produce or destroy whenever it benefits her most. That's worth more than my father's entire fortune. She wasn't protecting Suho. She was banking him." The weight of the betrayal didn't just anger him. It rearranged 5 years of his life into a shape he no longer recognized. Every quiet act of loyalty from Director Yoon, now a fresh wound. Every year of her sitting beside him at his father's memorial, a performance he hadn't known he was watching. And now, with her secret exposed by nothing more than a frightened child's nightmare, Tae-min understood something with total certainty. Director Yoon would not simply let this unravel quietly. A woman who had waited 5 years to play a card this valuable would not fold now. She would move to secure it or destroy it before sunrise. He was already reaching for his phone when it rang in his hand, and the name on the screen made Adaeze grab Suho and pull him instinctively back against her chest. Director Yoon. Tae-min answered, and her voice came through calm, warm, almost affectionate. The same voice she'd used 1,000 times to soothe him after board meetings gone wrong. Tae-min, she said gently. I heard you found something precious in the rain tonight. We should talk about what happens next, before anyone else finds out, and does something we'll all regret. If you're holding your breath right now, comment the words "found in the rain," because I need to know how many of you are feeling exactly what I wanted you to feel in this exact moment. Tae-min didn't shout. He didn't threaten. 5 years of running his father's organization had taught him that the most dangerous men in any room were always the quietest. And tonight, more than any other night of his life, he needed to be the most dangerous man in the room. Where? He said simply. The garden house at the old estate. Just you. A pause, deliberate, cruel in its gentleness. And bring the child. I'd like to finally meet him properly. No, Adaeze said before Tae-min had even lowered the phone, her arms tightening around Suho. Absolutely not. But Tae-min was already thinking 3 moves ahead, the way his father had trained him to since he was Suho's age. Because he understood something Director Yoon had perhaps forgotten in her decades of patient scheming. A woman who had spent 5 years protecting a secret instead of destroying it had never actually wanted the child dead. She wanted him controlled, and a woman who wants control can be given the illusion of it. I'm not bringing him, Tae-min said quietly, meeting Adaeze's eyes with a promise. I'm bringing everyone she's ever underestimated instead. By the time Tae-min arrived at the garden house alone, visibly alone, unarmed, exactly as instructed, Director Yoon was waiting on the veranda with 2 of her personal guards in the particular stillness of a woman who believed she had already won. You came without him, she said, disappointment flickering across her composed features. That wasn't the arrangement. The arrangement was you'd finally tell me the truth, Tae-min said. Everything. Tonight. She studied him for a long moment, and then, perhaps because 5 years of careful patience had earned her a certain confidence, or perhaps because some small remaining piece of loyalty to his father made her want him to understand, rather than simply obey, she began to talk. She told him how his father had come to her in a panic 5 years ago, terrified that a scandal involving an unapproved pregnancy would fracture the fragile alliances he'd spent decades building. She told him how she'd offered a solution. His father was too proud and too frightened to refuse. Hide the woman, let the child live under careful watch, and hold both as insurance against the day Tae-min might need to be redirected. Your father wanted control of you even after he was gone, she said. I simply made sure he'd have it. And what did you want? Tae-min asked. Director Yoon smiled, and for the first time, it didn't reach her eyes at all. The same thing I've always wanted, Tae-min, an organization that survives past both of you. If you'd married Min-ji-oh, as arranged, married strength into the family the way your father intended, none of this insurance would have ever needed to be spent. But you didn't. You spent 5 years grieving a lie instead of building alliances, and now I find myself needing leverage sooner than I expected. It was, Tae-min realized, almost an admission of guilt delivered like a business proposal. And it was in that exact moment, with her guard down just enough, that the estate's side gate opened and 4 of Tae-min's most trusted lieutenants stepped through. Men Director Yoon had never bothered to court because she'd underestimated how deeply loyalty, real loyalty, still ran beneath a mafia crown. Tae-min hadn't come to the garden house to negotiate. He'd come to be seen arriving alone, so that everyone watching would understand this had never been a fair fight to begin with. For her. You spent 5 years protecting a secret so you could weaponize it someday, Tae-min said. But you forgot the most important rule my father ever actually taught me. Never let your enemy know exactly where you'll be standing when the ground disappears. For the first time in decades, Director Yoon's composure cracked. She's about to lose everything she spent 5 years building, and honestly, she has it coming. Comment if you think Tae-min should show her mercy or none at all, because what happens next might surprise you either way. What happened next wasn't the bloodshed the genre might have promised. Tae-min had learned in the wreckage of everything his father built through fear, that violence only ever bought silence, never loyalty, and never truth. Instead, Director Yoon was stripped of every position, every account, every thread of influence she'd spent 30 years weaving into his family's empire, and handed over, not to a shallow grave, but to the very authorities she'd once used Detective Han and Director Ryu to manipulate, with enough evidence attached to guarantee she'd spend the remainder of her calculated life somewhere she could threaten no one ever again. It wasn't vengeance. It was something Taemin's father had never once offered anyone in his life. Justice, delivered without cruelty, because Taemin had decided, somewhere in that rain-soaked intersection hours earlier, that he would not raise his son inside the same machine of fear that had cost him his mother, his years, and nearly cost him everything else. 3 months later, the rain came again. Softer this time, the kind that fell over the city like a blessing instead of a warning. Adaeze stood on the balcony of a home that had no hidden ledgers, no watching eyes, no men in black cars slowing at intersections out of old grief. Suho ran across the garden below, laughing at something only a 5-year-old could find that funny, chasing a small white dog that had somehow become the most important member of the household within a single week. Tae-min came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her the way he'd wanted to for 5 stolen years, and rested his chin against her shoulder, watching their son exist, simply exist, without fear for the first time in his short life. "Do you regret it?" Adaeze asked quietly. "Everything it cost to get here?" Tae-min thought about his father, about the lie that had cost him 5 years he could never get back, about the woman who had almost turned his son into a weapon instead of a child. And then he thought about this. The rain falling soft outside, the sound of small feet on wet grass, the weight of Adaeze finally, fully safe in his arms. "The only thing I regret," he said, "is not being the one standing in the rain that day, instead of you. Some secrets are kept to protect the people we love. Others are kept to control them. The difference between the two is the entire distance between a family and a prison, and sometimes it takes losing 5 years to finally learn which one you were living in." If this story moved you even a little, subscribe, share it with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always finds its way home eventually, and tell me in the comments, what's the biggest lesson you're taking away from Adaeze and Taemin's story tonight?